And welcome back. We have been joined virtually this morning, all the way from Placencia, by the leader of the opposition, Shyne Barrow, who's here with us this morning to discuss a range of issues. Good morning, Mr. Barrow.
Good morning.
Good morning, the wonderful hosts of Open Your Eyes and all of the wonderful people throughout Belize.
How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I'm in Placencia right now. I was invited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the SICA Heads of State opening, which is a very important relationship that Belize has, the Central American Integration System. If those of you that are connoisseurs of history recall, it was the General President of Panama that really helped to turn the corner on Belize's push for independence when he met with George Price, because up until that time, almost all of the states, the nation states in Central America and Latin America were pro-Guatemala. And the General President of Panama really did all he could to help George Price get the Latin American heads of state to support Belize's push for independence. So we owe a great debt to our Latin American, Central American brothers and sisters, and so this is a very, very important relationship. And as leader of the opposition, I wanted to pay my respects to these heads of states and foreign ministers.
Excellent. Where I want to begin from this morning is obviously with the letter in response to the correspondence you had with the Chief Executive Officer for the Royal Caribbean Group. You wrote to CEO Jason Liberty on June 12th with a number of issues regarding the agreement that RCG has entered into with Boscalis International and Portico relating to the MOU. Let's start there. Let's get your initial response to the letter that was written to you by Josh Carroll.
Well, they offered to meet with me when they visit Belize, and I guess that could be the brighter part of the response. Other than that, it was conventional garden variety corporate speak. They have been made aware of the controversy, the accusations of corruption. When I wrote them, there was not the Senate inquiry, which has certainly escalated this matter when it is not just the opposition leader and interested parties who have business interests, the other ports and those that may stand to lose from their competition advancing. It is the social partners, the churches, the NGOs, the unions that have all come together to say that something is wrong and we need to get to the bottom of this and we need answers. So I maintain my position that this Portico definitive agreement was born in corruption. I maintain that the fact that the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister John Briceño, and his Minister of State brought that definitive agreement to Cabinet with recommendation. If you read the Cabinet confidential memorandum, there was nothing in there that spoke of any illegality of the definitive agreement or any possible exposure that Belize would be subjected to, which is why we're even bringing this for consideration. It was all about recommending this so that the government of Belize could move expeditiously to pass the legislation to bring that dubious definitive agreement to fruition. So again, Royal Caribbean has been put on notice And it is befuddling. I don't want to cast any aspersions on Royal Caribbean, but again, you look at the State Bank, cruise port. Uh, you look at all of the tens of millions of dollars that they have invested uh, in that development, and they are a causeway away from solving the tender problem. As stands, they can birth. I just don't understand why any multinational would want to involve themselves in a partnership with a company such as Portico that is mired in scandal.
Okay, so allow me to interject here quickly. Part of the letter speaks to the fact that extensive work has been done in looking at or examining the lay of the land. You have three competitors in a fairly small space, so to speak. You have Stake Bank, you have Waterloo, and then you have Port Magical Belize. And essentially what RCG is saying, that of the three, Port Magical is the most viable, most operationally viable. How do you respond to that? Because I don't know that they would just be putting that out there without some informed position.
I just don't see how Port Magical doesn't exist. Port Magical, you know, we have the sitting of the House of Representatives on Friday.
Yes.
And so I was going to ask the Minister of Natural Resources, had he granted any such permit for seabed, which is crucial, pivotal to the Port Magical development. And he responded to me that no, there has been no such permit granted. So Port Magical doesn't exist. I maintain in Creole vernacular, Port Magical is a dead race project.
Were you able to have a look at the draft minutes of the meeting that was held in February 2021, where...
No, I wasn't, but I'd just like to conclude my response to why Royal would be taking the position that they're taking. Again, Port Magical doesn't exist. Port Magical is a dead race figment of a bunch of colluding forces, government and private sector imagination. Again, you go to the State Bank project. If Royal Caribbean is serious about solving the tender problem, that would be the most practical options. Again, they have not disclosed why not State Bank, and I hope to have that very blunt, candid conversation with them. You even go to Waterloo. If Waterloo was given the type of consideration that we see the chairman, the CEO of the department that is in charge with granting the approvals, I can't recall the gentleman's name, but the
Dr. Williams?
Yes, Dr. Williams. If Dr. Williams had taken that approach, which I have long advocated, it is not that I am a Waterloo proponent. I do believe it is the best project, but Mr. Finstein's project is an equally compelling project the more and more you look at it. But all I am asking for is fair treatment, is equitable treatment for all of the developers. And what we reject, what we resent, what we abhor in the opposition, and I think all objection, a reasonable, objective Belizeans object to, is this preferential treatment. And as we have unpacked Portico, we can see why they got their preferential treatment. If Dr. Williams had said to the EIA committee that we need to find a solution for Waterloo, if the government of Belize would have said, listen, State Bank has a causeway permit by way of the Drunk Key agreement that had already been signed or permission that had already been given, if all of these things had been done, then Royal Caribbean may have had a different analysis, a study, and would have come to a different conclusion. But if the government has done everything to disadvantage the two most credible port projects, Port of Belize exists. There is a port there. We know that Lord Ashcroft has the billions of dollars to invest and develop that project. State Bank exists. We know, regardless of what some of the ministers of cabinet absurdly have tried to say, we know that Mike Finstein has invested tens of millions of dollars, has gotten to, I think, upwards of $100 million invested in State Bank. So why would Royal Caribbean not look at certainly State Bank, who is ready to go? I don't understand it. For a project such as Portico that is years away from being ready to tender, to deal with the tender solution and birth ships, it makes no sense.
So then, Shyne, what is your reaction to the Prime Minister or other ministers saying that they would look at the document to amend some of the conditions that was in it, the definitive agreement?
Again, they've been caught. So it is someone saying, I'm not sorry for what I did, I'm sorry that I got caught. Again, the government has lost all credibility at this juncture. So I cannot look at them as honest brokers. They were exposed, and the fact that they are now trying to amend a document that should have never been brought to cabinet cannot be taken seriously by the Belizean people. We've seen where 850 acres of land was given out to, again, people close to the Prime Minister. David Morales is the Prime Minister's first cousin and the lawyer for Portico. And he and other people and other PUP donors got 850 acres of land, all to sell to Portico. So when I made these allegations in the beginning of this process to say something is wrong here, why would the Prime Minister, why would any Minister of Finance bring such a dubious agreement to the cabinet? Why didn't they come out and call a press conference, a press briefing, and expose the corrupt acts or the alleged corrupt acts of the former minister, or at best, terrible decision making?
Allow me to piggyback on what Sabrina was asking. So at the last House meeting, the Prime Minister symbolically rubbished the initial definitive agreement. What do you make of that in terms of what you believe will happen going forward? I know that perhaps negotiations will take place in terms of coming up with something more amenable. What do you make of it?
Again, the prudent thing to have done is to tell Royal Caribbean, listen, we have State Bank ready to go. The prudent thing to have done would be to tell Dr. Williams, the same energy that you gave to approving the EIA for a Portico, you need to find that energy, and let's get Waterloo up and running so that the Royal Caribbean Group can have options. But I am telling you, they deliberately prejudice the two credible port projects for the favor of Portico. Look at Portico. Portico, the definitive agreement was signed, and it didn't even have an EIA. It was signed in the dark of the night, regardless of what they tried to say. No cabinet approval. The cabinet subcommittee did not approve that. You can send an email to me, Isani. That doesn't mean I read the email. There is no proof. There is no communication with the former Attorney General, with Minister Pantan, with Minister Faber, with any response or any dialogue saying, yes, this definitive agreement looks good. So what the former minister did was absolutely wrong. signing a definitive agreement without even having an EIA. So again, when you look at the juxtaposition of all of these people that are close to the Prime Minister, close to interests in the government, then it explains why Portico is getting this preferential treatment. So to me, the prudent thing for the government to do is to put Portico to the side. They need to start all over again with all of this exposure of potential corruption. And they need to look at the State Bank project and the Waterloo project. That would be the prudent thing, because obviously Royal Caribbean doesn't mind waiting another 5 years if they're saying that the Portico analysis is what led them to want to partner with Portico, which will not be ready. They haven't even broken ground. Mike Finstein has spent over $100 million and they're ready to open. And they're just a causeway away from solving the tender issue. I'm sure if Waterloo was given the EIA and given the considerations that Portico was given, they'd be ready to go. There is a port there. The type of development, shame on the South Side ministers of government that have not come out more vociferously against this. Look how Belize is being deprived of the type of development that the South Side would benefit from so tremendously. It makes no sense to go with Portico.
Okay, so there are a number of environmental concerns that were raised in respect of the proposed Port Magical development. I know that while to some people it may seem trivial, the idea that, you know, the general location where this project would set to be built is part of a habitat for the Antillean manatees. And I know that that too was raised by members of NEAC at a previous meeting in 2021. What are your thoughts on the environmental concerns here?
Well, I had my board, my director on the board of the Conservancy, the Blue Bond Conservancy Fund, right? I don't know if you guys missed that letter, but Mr. Lindsay Garbutt wrote to the Conservancy Fund CEO to express these things. We have a Blue Bond agreement that dictates that we need to, protect our environment and protect our natural resources, and the manatee certainly constitutes those types of commitments. How is it that we're overlooking these things? How is it that we're overlooking that 1 million metric or meters more is being dredged in the Port Magical project than is in the Waterloo, yet Waterloo was denied? How is it that we overlook the fact that when the multinational Vulcan wanted to go to Gales Point, they wanted to go to Gales Point to do some mining.
An entire stink was raised.
Yes, and they didn't even, the ministers of cabinet refused to even have a meeting with them. They refused to have a meeting with them. They didn't even want anything to do with that. It wasn't even up for consideration. So again, why Portico?
So does it strike you?
Portico?
Does it strike you as odd, perhaps, then, that while a similar stink was raised in respect of Waterloo and the amount of material that it would be dredging, and you find out that Port of Magical would be dredging 1 million cubic meters more, but the environmental community has seemed to be mute on that issue?
It certainly is not a good look. I know that Senator Chanona gave a response, but it begs the question. It begs the question. It really does. We're just looking for equity as an opposition. We want everyone to be treated fairly. We don't discriminate from PUP developers or UDP developers or who is friendly and who is not. It really is about doing what is right for the Belizean people. And that is why corruption has stunted our development for 40 years. Because with corruption, you cut off your nose to try to benefit your face. But either way, you'll have a hole and you'll bleed out. It doesn't make any sense. what we're seeing here, and the only thing that can explain it is corruption. That's the only thing that can explain why Portico is being given this preferential treatment that no other port is being given. And the most glaring example of discrimination would be the State Bank project. You have a Belizean owned
Shyne.
cruise port. Yes, sorry. You have a Belizean owned cruise port with Mr. Finstein. Waterloo is Belizean owned as well. But Mr. Finstein is already there. You go to his
You do realize that
development.
the work is at a standstill momentarily, though. I mean, notwithstanding all the millions that have been invested,
again, whatever standstill it is at, I heard Mr. Finstein say, it had to do with some logistics as far as certain materials not being ready. However, it is much further along than any of the projects.
That's fair to say. Yeah.
And again, when the government is saying, oh, well, you don't have the causeway, or you don't have this, according to Mr. Feinstein, the government has done nothing. This PUP government, everything that Mr. Feinstein has, who he admitted to being a lifelong supporter of the PUP, he got from the UDP, because that is how we govern. We don't discriminate against people, and we don't give preferential treatment. But again, I don't understand why Portico, unless it is corruption. That is the only reason why they would be pushing and fighting for this project, which is 5 years from being anywhere close to ready.
Shyne, I go to your comment. I go to your comment on corruption because it was pointed out that the definitive agreement was produced and signed by Erwin Contreras, a former UDP minister. My question to you is, have you spoken to Erwin Contreras at any point since this entire scandal has unfolded?
I haven't had the opportunity to speak to him. He's not been available. But we as the UDP, again, the difference between the UDP and the People's United Party is we denounce corruption regardless of who is the perpetrator. And the United Democratic Party has been united in its condemnation of that illegal signing of the Portico definitive agreement. So that is not even a question. We have all come out in vehement opposition to any such agreement being signed without the approval of the cabinet. And when you look at the content of the definitive agreement, it is not even a matter of a procedural irregularity of not going to cabinet to get approval. It is a matter of the stench of corruption, the wholesale giveaway of all that would benefit the Belizean people. So there is no walk back from the opposition as to how wrong it was for the former minister to sign that. But the focus, as I am happy that the Senate inquiry will be centered around, is how did it go from the former minister engaging in what can only be considered a corrupt act to the current Minister of Finance and Prime Minister embracing wholeheartedly that dubious agreement and trying to get it into legislation.
You returned to Parliament on Friday, and I know that you've been very diligent in putting forward questions relating to this particular issue. What do we expect from you on Friday in terms of either raising other concerns of yours regarding this issue?
Well, as I said, the honorable member from Lake Independence, the Minister of Natural Resources, did answer the question already, which is what I had put forward, but I withdrawn that question, which is, has the government given permission to Portico for the water to build on the seabed? So the response from the minister was no. They did not grant that permission. I actually saw the CEO, Dr. Williams, when I was returning from Charleston South Carolina. I was there for the opening of the African American Museum. And I asked him, I said, I hope you didn't give any permit for that seabed. He said no, but formally the Minister of Natural Resources did respond. The other question I have is, has Portico complied with the terms and conditions of the EIA? Because that was signed in April of 2021, and there were certain things that they needed to have gotten done within a certain time period. And we need to know whether they have complied, or again, they're given special treatment and there's no compliance. It is, again, it is so offensive that they got a definitive agreement signed before they even had the EIA, when the EIA is a requisite to get the definitive agreement signed. And the fact that all of this is being swept under the rug to say, oh, well, you know, we'll fix it. The only way to fix it is to completely abort dead raise Portico and to focus on Stake Bank and Waterloo.
Let's circle a bit back to Stake Bank, though.
Oh, my last question to Minister is
sure.
Also related to the fear of strike action. As you know, the stevedores have given notice, and I believe that it has been a complete dereliction of duty by the government of Belize to not try to find a resolution to this problem. I am extremely sympathetic to the stevedores, but as a government in waiting, we always give consideration to corporations. So I'm not necessarily choosing sides, but the government has a responsibility to try to resolve this matter before we have a strike at the port. And they've done nothing. So that is one of my other questions.
So we just to interject and respond to that particular concern of yours. I know that we interviewed the Minister of Labor yesterday, Honorable Oscar Rikenya, and he mentioned that the ESAT, the Essential Services Arbitration Tribunal, has been reconvened to look at the issue. And as such, whatever notice of pending strike action is on hold until the ESAT can determine a way forward. That's just to respond to that one, though. But circling back to Stake Bank, is it not of concern to you, as it would to many of us, that while perhaps the causeway is what is remaining, that if there isn't sufficient monies to guarantee the complete construction of this causeway, that you would have a mile and a half, a quarter mile, or however long amount of steel and cement jutting into the Caribbean Sea if it's incomplete?
You know, I have to be fair. I have to be fair. Mike Feinstein is the preeminent, tourism development mogul in Belize. He has done it. You look at the tourist village.
But some would argue that he's out of money.
How successful that has been. So again, unless Mr. Bezos and the people from Atlantic Bank tell me that they are not going to give the financing for that project, I can't believe that a person of Mr. Feinstein's stature would not be able to raise that money. I just can't believe that anything is possible, but you have to look at a person's track record. How is it that you want me to believe that Feinstein will not be able to build his causeway, but David Gegg and Sharma, two low-level tourism operators, well, one is a low-level tourism operator, the other is a operator in the free zone, that they could raise the $350 million. And then if you say, well, Royal Caribbean is going to finance that, then again, it seems that it was all set up so that Portico could be the last standing. But I don't question Mr. Feinstein's credibility as to being able to complete that causeway.
Let me go in a different direction now. The Civil Assets and Recovery Bill, I understand that the United Democratic Party, the parliamentarians, opposed this particular proposed legislation. Let's get your take on that.
Well, the government is in a rush to pass the FATF compliance legislations. There's a slew of legislations that are being hastily implemented in order for us to meet compliance with international regulations. While the criticisms that I had for the Civil Asset Recovery and Unexplained Wealth Bill was that it didn't go back far enough. I believe it was 12 years in the first instance, and then you'd have to apply to go back 20 years when the regional standard is 20 years. The global standard for developed nation is there is no statutory limitation.
Yeah.
So again, I would expect that the PUP, who was thrust into office on a good governance, anti-corruption platform, would go the developed nation route and say, you know what, there's no statute of limitations here. If we can prove that your wealth is unexplained and we have questions, you know, we will come after you. However, the reason that there was an objection in the Senate on the grounds of, well, how is it that you're going to recover assets from someone and not criminally charge them? And again, due process. We live in a country, you know, thank God, with a strong democracy, you know, strong judiciary, where the rule of law is tantamount. So it is a very serious thing to go after someone, but not charge them criminally, because if you have obtained assets in an illicit fashion, that is a crime. So again, I understand what the lawyers are saying, led by the Honorable Senator Perfeet. Okay, fine. So let's put in the legislation that the people will be criminally prosecuted, and once that criminal prosecution is successful, then we will move to recover the assets. To me, that is only fair. But again, it goes back to the same. I want to use the term that Bill Lindo and other people use, the PUDP way. The criticism is that, well, the UDP sometimes they don't put the legislation into being, but the PUP, while they put the legislation into being, they botch it where there can be no teeth to the legislation.
So is it then essentially
that the problem? So what can happen here that we have to be concerned with is a political witch hunt, where you can go after UDP members, because remember, it's only 12 years, and the government is in a PUP government, and you can just go after UDP people without having a true due process.
Okay, at the heart of the issue, Shyne, is unjust enrichment. That's central to this entire conversation. Allow me to finish.
I am saying, just as they did with Rene Montero or anyone else, charge them. It is already a law that you cannot engage in self-enrichment. You cannot use your office for your own benefit. So charge them and then recover the assets.
So is it essentially putting the cart before the horse then? If you're saying, look, we'll move to seize your assets, but we won't take criminal action against you.
Prosecuting them in a court of law.
Yeah.
And I think the Belizean people would want that. The Belizean, you know, they always go back to my past when I was 19 years old. I was defending myself. The real criminals are those in suit and tie and in cabinet and in government that are looting, robbing, the Belizean people blind. Those are the real criminals. And I think the Belizean people are exhausted with the cycle of corruption. And the best way to deter corruption is that some of them need to be bangles. Some of them need to go to Hattiville. Some of these government ministers on both sides.
Yes, that's fair to say. That's fair to say, because at the end of the day, the argument can be made that perhaps there are persons in government, past and present, who have unjustly enriched themselves by virtue of their office. Would you agree that that is so?
Absolutely.
Or that can be so?
Let's prosecute them. Let's prosecute them. I have no difficulty with that. I have called for that currently, much to the chagrin of some of my colleagues, but fair is fair. You know, I am not here to be a part of any political organization that is not looking out for the best interests of Belizeans. And the only way that we can secure and protect our Belizean populace is to start to hold these ministers, past and present, accountable, and the greatest accountability to committing crimes, using your office to commit crimes of corruption, is to be prosecuted and to be convicted and to have to serve the time. So the real criminals are those in the cabinet, past and present, that are using the taxpayer dollars to enrich themselves. I abhor it.
All right, so I have another question I want to ask you, but I want for your response to be as fair and level-headed. I know it's going to be a tough one.
Is this redistricting?
No, we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
So I forget redistricting.
We'll get around to it. You've owed me a response for that one, but we'll get around to that.
Indeed.
So
sorry,
here's my question. The Briceño administration issued its midterm report last week, in which it touted several achievements and the milestone it has made at 2.5 years in. Let's get your take on that. Very sober position.
No, a complete failure, no different than the definitive agreement that the Briceño administration, the Minister of Finance, Honorable Prime Minister, brought to Cabinet, trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. It's a complete failure. Citizen security, you know, I saw the Commissioner of Police last night at the SICA. So before he tries to come back and say that I told him he's the best commissioner, I made it abundantly clear. Again, because, you know, I won't say that he's my enemy. I have known him for quite some time. I would go far to say I consider him a friend. I have no problem personally with Chester Williams, but he needs to resign. He needs to resign. Minister Musa, he needs to resign. We need a new perspective, new prisms in the Ministry of Police. They actually have a cataract issue. They have no vision. They can't see anything as far as solutions are concerned. So as far as citizen security, I believe we have never been so unsafe. You know, yesterday the commissioner said in front of one of the hoteliers, don't you feel safe? Just the other day we had a home invasion. Somebody was shot right here in Placencia. We had tourists killed the other day in San Pedro. And then before that, right before New Year's, a tourist was shot in a drive-by in San Pedro. We have a witness that testified in a murder trial. His body was found in a shallow grave in Biscayne. We had a young man walking home from his job as a cook, trying to do the right thing, gunned down in Port Loyola a few days ago. Come on.
But Shyne,
this is not what the PUP promised. So I believe the majority of Belizeans would say that they're failing as far as citizen security. You go to healthcare. The Prime Minister promised that he would build, he would expand KHMH, that he would upgrade all of the facilities, that he would make sure that free medication, where practical, would be provided, and subsidized medication would be provided and as low cost as possible. None of that has happened. You hear the medical practitioners, not the opposition, the medical practitioners, they were protesting the other day, the Nurses Association, the KHMH Union, because they did not have the basic essentials that they need to treat their patients. You can't get any medication. You have to go to the private facilities to get anything, to even get a CAT scan. That is a complete failure. Then they borrow $90 million to go give a crony a contract to build a building. Because if they can't properly equip the facilities, the public health facilities that we have now, what will convince you that they will take that 90 million and do anything more than give a crony a contract?
Well, I understand.
Go ahead, sorry.
I understand though, Shyne, that we are set to receive a CT scan, but that's not my question. I wanted to ask you.
Yes, after 2.5 years. I mean, again, so you're asking me what the grade is? The grade is an F. You go to
even with the increase of our minimum wage.
With the increase of inflation, that increase is zero increase. That needed to have gone to $10 with inflation. And again, in developed nations and even in our regional counterparts, they have all put forth solutions to deal with inflation. What does the Honorable Minister of Human Development do? She doesn't respond when you are reaching out to her to say, listen, I have constituents that are on the margins, below the poverty line. How can they get their grocery bags? You don't have to give it to me. Just tell me where they should go, because they've gone to human services and they've been turned away. So you can't tell me about a $5 increase when inflation has exorbitantly raised the cost of living like we have never seen before. Then you go to economic development. They claim that the economy is growing so robustly, record growth. I've already debunked that to show that all we did is make it back to pre-COVID growth. But then if the economy is growing so much, why has the government borrowed $700 million in the last 2.5 years? Again, so to me that is a failure, because this is the same government that said that they would decrease our debt. The blue bond was already in train under the UDP. So they have, yes, they benefited from UDP policy, wiped away 500 million in debt, only to bring back that 500 plus 200. So again, terrible fiscal management. We don't see the growth. We had the employment numbers where they have a new threshold, a new consideration of how they calculate the numbers as to unemployment, but that doesn't change the fact that unemployment is not lower than it was under the UDP, and there are still what you call people in suspended animation, in limbo. There's about 130,000 people that are not employed and are not unemployed, according to their calculations. That makes no sense. We should have a government that has a unit that is preparing people for the workforce, doing everything they can to get people into the workforce. Because I agree that giving a grocery bag and giving some type of financial aid is not the final solution. It is a part of the solution. But as we help those people on the margins get themselves together, there should be government efforts to train people so that they can become ready for the workforce. I don't see any of that happening. If it is happening, please, GOB, let me know so that I can send my constituents and constituents across the country that are in need of such aid to get into the workforce. How can we get that 130,000, as much of that into the workforce as possible? We don't see that. So all we've seen is tacos, just chepe, a government that is long-winded, great on presentations of what they will do, but they've done absolutely nothing. It has become worse.
Well, Shyne, thank you so much for your input.
You see, you forgot redistricting.
See, the problem is though, Shyne, we're just about out of time, and I promise you, we gave you more than we actually had.
You see, Shyne, you see how you set me up? But
I'll get you at the press
conference. You have to come to the press briefing.
Yes, I'll get you at the press
afternoon.
conference this afternoon. I got you.
And of course, we also look forward to your presentation this Friday. So we want to thank you so much for joining us this morning, Shyne. As always, we appreciate your input here at Open Your Eyes, and we look forward to your presence in the future, hopefully in person, because we know that you tend to prefer that anyway.
Yes, thank you so very much for having me. Have a blessed day. Everyone out there, have a blessed day and a productive week. God bless you all.
All right, thank you so much. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, it's all about KTV The Remix, and we'll be joined by the judges, so don't go away.